On today's episode of Locked On Wild, what if we set our sights a little higher on a trade target? Tage Thompson, perhaps?
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we are going to take a look at something that I am personally trying to manifest, a Tage Thompson trade. We'll take a look at what exactly the Buffalo Sabres need, and why it may be something that the Wild should consider to swing for the fences, not only for this year, but for beyond as well. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild since 2021, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, and happy to be back with you here as we push towards the Dallas game coming up tomorrow night. And I will just put it out there. We are doing a postcast tomorrow night, but it's probably going to start a little later than they typically do. Covering a high school basketball tournament here over the next few days. And we've got games that go at 6:30 and 8:30. So typically we'll be done probably about 10. But I'm going to schedule it in advance so that it's all set to go. And then when I get home, I'll just fire it up and we'll get going. But we've been teasing this for a while, mainly because I just kind of want to think outside the box for a potential trade. We've talked about blockbuster quite a bit. We've talked about Brock Nelson quite a bit. But there is, I think, a potential opportunity to strike while the iron is hot with a team that is in desperate need of a major shakeup. That, of course, is the Buffalo Sabres. Now, the Buffalo Sabres did snap their 13-game losing streak, but they did so by beating the Oilers 7-1. So does that really count as, hey, we're back? Or is it just taking advantage of a team that is also struggling to get their footing this season? All told, the Buffalo Sabres right now have the fewest points in the entirety of the Eastern Conference. And if you want to go a little further than that, the only team that has fewer points is the Chicago Blackhawks. And it's a Sabres team. They're 1-7-2 in their last 10 games. They lost 13 games in a row. They accumulated like 4 points in that span. That's it. The vibes are dead. It's a team that is in need of a major jolt, a major shakeup, because nothing that the Buffalo Sabres do at this point in the season is working. None of it's going right. And they need something to happen. They need to get a little jolt to that mix. And it led me down a particular path. I have nothing to go off of with this, and so a lot of it is me kind of connecting dots where I want them to go. You have a player in Tage Thompson who's signed to a contract through 2030. We have already seen the Buffalo Sabres lose key top-end pieces who don't have a desire to stick around through the lull years. Jack Eichel, Sam Reinhart, both players who departed after getting cold feet and not wanting to stick around when the going was going to get tough. So there's precedence here. There's precedence for a Buffalo Sabres team that wants to make sure that they don't get nothing for these players. And wants to make sure that they, get something that can help kind of lead them back lead them forward into a new era. The best way to do so is to make some sort of a big trade. And we've seen it very recently with the Sam Reinhart and Jack Eichel trades. So maybe Tage Thompson is coming up next. And I think this is something, if I'm the Minnesota Wild, I think is worth pursuing. Because before we get too far into the weeds into what would you get in return, let's just look at Tage Thompson, the player. Now, he has all told 149 goals in 8 years. So he is 27. He came up as a young pup with the St. Louis organization at the age of 20. He was then traded to Buffalo in the Ryan O'Reilly trade and really started to come on at the age of 24 in the 2021-2022 season. Well, funny you should ask. You want to know where Tage Thompson sits in the entirety of the NHL in terms of goals since 2021-2022? He's 14th. He's just ahead of Zach Hyman, Steven Stamkos, and Jake Gensel, and also Jason Robertson. And just behind Kyle Connor, William Nylander, Chris Kreider, and Alex Ovechkin. 131 goals in the last 4 seasons. So he's averaging over 30 goals per season. He is 6'6", 220 pounds, has a rocket for a shot. You'd be surprised at the defensive numbers, though, too. We'll talk about those as the show unfolds, but just looking at the numbers for him, for Tage, for Tage Thompson, or Tommy Dangles, as he's called, currently has 17 goals in 30 games, 9 assists, so he's got 26 points in 30 games. Now, he did miss a few games, but it sounds like has worked his way or is nearing a return into the lineup. He is shooting a career-high 19.3% this season. He has 88 shots on goal in 30 games. After his low shot total being 246 over the last 3 seasons. His goal total plateaued at a career high of 47 in that 2022-2023 season where the Buffalo Sabres were having that magical run. He had 94 points in 78 games. Now, some of the peripheral numbers, he's playing a career high 18 minutes, 36 seconds per night on the ice. His face-off percentage, he doesn't take a ton of them, but his face-off percentage is at 40.6. He averages roughly a hit per game. He's got 12 blocks in 30 games, 15 giveaways, which, giveaways aren't super indicative of how you're playing, because it might be that you throw the puck towards an opponent and it gets stolen away, but it was a good pass by you. It still counts as a giveaway. But the thing that is interesting for me is I like to use this metric, this points shares metric, to kind of take stock of where a player is at. Now, it's a new era for Buffalo. Lindy Ruff coming in. It's not the high-flying attack that the Buffalo Sabres have been over the last few seasons. They are playing, or trying to play, a little bit more of a defensive type game, but it's really working very well. They've given up 120 goals. They're minus 16 in the goals department so far this year. But looking at Tage Thompson's stats, his defensive point shares, and point shares basically determines the number of points in the standings that a player contributes either offensively or defensively. For instance, for the Minnesota Wild, Kirill Kaprizov, I think, at last check, right off the top of my head, was worth 11 point shares offensively, which is an extraordinary number at this point in the season. It basically means that he has been responsible for 5 wins by himself, by what he brings to the table offensively. Tage Thompson right now, through 30 games, is at 2.8 offensive point shares, 1.9 defensive point shares, which is already a career high for him in any season. He's already at 1.9, and his total for this season so far is 4.6. So he has been worth roughly a game and a half offensively so far this year. He's been worth one game defensively so far this season, and he's been worth roughly 5 points in the standings in his overall play on the ice. Now let's take a look at where that ranks among the Wild players so far this season. Point shares on offense of, what did we say the number was at for Tage? 2.8. 2.8 offensive point shares would be second on the team behind Kirill Kaprizov. It would be ahead of Matt Boldy, who's at 2.4. Marco Rossi's at 2.3. Those are the only players other than Kirill Kaprizov who's at 5.1. I think the 11-point shares is the previous season because Kirill is worth 5.1 offensive point shares right now, 2.9 on defense, and 8 total on the season. So 2.9 would be second on the team, or 2.8, second on the team right now. How about the 1.9 defensive point shares? That would rank 10th, just below Matt Boldy. Matt Boldy's at an even 2 defensive point shares this season. Marco Rossi's at 2.1. John Merrill's at 1.6. So Tage Thompson would be in the top 10 for Minnesota Wild players right now. Now let's look at some other statistics. Let's just look at simple shots on goal. Tage has 88 shots on goal through the first 30 games of the season. I don't know why that number seems extraordinarily low for him so far. He has 191 total shot attempts in 30 games. So if we do the math on that, 191, if I could actually type it out, 191 divided by 30 is roughly 6.4 per game. So let's take that times 82. So that's 522 total shot attempts this season, which is it's just off his career high, which he set in 2022-2023. So he's shooting the puck a ton. 88 divided by 30, that's roughly just under 3 shots on goal per game. Multiply that by 82, that's 240 shots on goal. Slightly below last year, but he's shooting a career high 19.3%. 17 goals divided by 30 games is 0.56 goals per game. Take that out over 82 games, that's 46 goals. So his goals pace is right on schedule for the Sabres so far this year. And if we put it 88 shots on goal so far, would sit third on the team right now, just ahead of Ryan Hartman. Kirill's got 120, Matt Boldy's got 117, and Ryan Hartman has 72. Total shot attempts, again, it would sit, Tage would sit third, distant third. Matt Boldy's got 228 total shot attempts right now. Tage has 191. So that's 60 clear of the next closest person. Are you liking any of this so far? We've barely scratched the surface as to what Tage Thompson can do. Because the more I think about this, and the odds of it happening are extremely low, but I think we have to kind of look at something that I've seen in the comment section a lot recently. So we'll talk about if a rental is going to do what it needs to do to kind of push the Minnesota Wild over the top, or if a big swing makes more sense. We'll talk about that as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are just about here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. Tonight's Thursday night football game, though, shield your eyes. 9 total points, no touchdowns, not FanDuel friendly. Not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which player will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder, we will have a postcast for you coming up after the Dallas game. Just might start a little later than we typically do, but we'll get the room all scheduled in advance. And once I'm ready to roll, we'll get things rolling after hopefully a Minnesota Wild win against the Dallas Stars. But we'll talk more about that game coming up tomorrow. I still want to keep the conversation going regarding Mr. Tage Thompson, because there are two schools of thought here. There's one school of thought in which a rental is able to do enough to kind of propel the Minnesota Wild up towards the top of the list in the conversation, or if you feel like a rental will not cure what ails the team. I feel like those are the two kind of central focus areas where we're at right now, because you look at the areas of need. Secondary scoring, very, very badly, and special teams. You need somebody that can help on preferably both units, but definitely the penalty kill. Power play, I think, will course correct. I can't say that as a certainty because, well, look at where we're at. But you feel like they should. I guess we'll wait and see. But if you could get somebody that could help the secondary scoring and could help on the penalty kill, that I think would help bandage up some wounds that maybe then you get to the point with the goaltending the Wild have, with the defense they have. If you can get secondary scoring to help out Kirill Kaprizov, maybe you feel like that's enough to propel you into the conversation. But if you're not going to be able to patch up that penalty kill, we know what is going to happen when the Wild enter the postseason against whoever it may be. It's right there for the picking. It's like having a herd of wildebeests, and one of them has a bite mark on its back leg, like a pretty gnarly bite mark. And you as the herd are trying to shelter that wildebeest from a pack of lions. They smell the blood. They can see the blood. You can try to hide that as much as you want, but those lions, one way or the other, they're going to get that wildebeest. Yeah, I just watched a bunch of Animal Planet the other day, so that's where that came from. But I think the point still stands. Is you can bandage up a leaky penalty kill with a good offense, as the Wild did in 2021-2022. You can bandage up a leaky penalty kill with a Vezina caliber goalie, as they did in 2022-2023. But what happens if you get neither of those things? Then you get what happened last year, and what has the funny thing is, you're getting the goaltending this year. The penalty kill still is just very Civ-ish and very ish in general. So then you've got the train of thought of those that are saying, are you going to be able to get something that can really turn that penalty kill from a detriment into a good unit? And are you going to get something that's able to help the secondary scoring too. It's not likely. And so this is where I kind of view it as such. Your window is maybe not open for like a playoff contention window, like a legitimate contention window. It's probably not open. But with all the prospects in the system right now, with the players that will be expected to join, and with what you have to potentially play around with after a few contracts go off the books, you're on the porch. You're probably on the porch. You just haven't opened the door yet. So that's where maybe a big swing comes in. And somebody who can give you bona fide scoring can be your number 2 option, because he's been the number 1 in Buffalo for a minute. So Tage Thompson could come in and be the bona fide number 2. You still have Matt Boldy as now the 3rd option, but you've got somebody that has a very, very hard and fast shot that, look, the Wild have plenty of center depth. You don't have to play Tage Thompson as a center. You can play him as a very big wing. Now, is he going to play the physical sort of style that the Minnesota Wild typically like to play from their forwards? No. But I'll tell you what, he's going to shoot a lot, and he's going to score a healthy amount of goals. Like I said, he's on pace for 46 this year, while shooting a career high. His shots are going. His shot volume is down a little bit. Now, this is probably because of the injury, most likely, but he's still a dangerous scorer. And let's look at Tage Thompson's numbers over the last few years on special teams. In 2021, 2022, he had 10 power play goals out of his 38. He had 26 even strength, 10 power play, 2 shorthanded. He scored 20 power play goals in 2022, 2023 when he had 47 goals. He also had a shorty that year. He had 9 power play goals when he had 29 goals in 2023, 2024. Now, this year he only has 2, but I do believe that Buffalo Sabres power play is mostly garbage. We're just going to confirm that right now so that I don't just talk out of both sides of my mouth. Yeah, it's 29th in the league right now at 14.7. They have only scored 15 power play goals on the season. Now, who has scored those power play goals? You wonder. Jason Zucker has 4. Rasmus Dahlin and JJ Peterka have 3. That's 15. And then Tage Thompson has 2 of the others. So that's 12 of your 15 power play goals right there. So it's a unit that's not having an abundance of success. But think about him on that top unit with Kirill Kaprizov. And Thompson is not playing hardly at all on the penalty kill. The Buffalo Sabres penalty kill is at 77%, so it's middle of the pack. But he's playing like 4 or 5 seconds a night on the penalty kill. So it's not really being utilized in that regard. Oh, and Tage Thompson is, in his career, 8 of 21 in shootouts, which is not great. But he at least has experience in that regard too. Although that's way lower on the list than the things that he brings to the table that I think would be very valuable for this team. Now, how do you make it work? How do you handle the contract? Don't worry. We'll tackle that as we return on today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Prize Picks. If you love sports, you're going to love Prize Picks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, football, or any of your favorite sports, Prize Picks makes it easy to get in on the action. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas and offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, Prize Picks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. This week on Prize Picks, I am locking in to the Minnesota Wild Dallas Stars matchup. We're going with Kirill Kaprizov to have over 4 shots on goal and Jason Robertson to record less than 1 assist. It is so simple to make your picks, and you can have fun with friends while potentially cashing out fast. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly at Prize Picks. Run your game. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder, we will have a postcast for you after the Dallas Stars game. It's just going to be slightly later than usual. It will depend on what time I get home, but we'll have one for you. We'll get it all scheduled in advance. So just look out for it on YouTube, and we'll talk about whatever happens between the Wild and the Stars in tomorrow night's game. So what would it take to acquire a player of Tage Thompson's caliber? Well, let's start off by saying the obvious, that this is incredibly, there's a low likelihood that this happens. But I am a dreamer, and I'm going to try to will this into existence because I think Tage Thompson covers a lot of ground that the Minnesota Wild could use some big help with. But let's look at a few things. Tage Thompson, number one, his contract. He signed a 7-year, $50 million contract before this season. It expires before the 2022-2023 season, It expires at the end of the 2029-2030 season. Tage Thompson will be 32 years old at that point. The contract is $7.142 million per year. And Thompson has, and this is interesting. Tage has a modified no trade that kicks in next season. He's got a 5-team no trade list that kicks in 2025, 2026 and runs through the duration of the contract. So that would behoove the Buffalo Sabres to do something if they feel the need to take a step back, refocus, regroup, and if Tage Thompson says, I'm good. But what you would need to do if you're the Minnesota Wild, you'd need to find a way to make that 7.142 more palatable. The Buffalo Sabres at last check, just want to confirm this. The Buffalo Sabres at last check are not using they're using one of their buyout retained salary slots. They're using for the Jeff Skinner buyout, which will be on the books for them through the 2027-2028 season. I think the Minnesota Wild would need to have Buffalo retain at least a portion. I don't know if they could get half of that contract to be retained by the Sabres. That's a tall order to have that on your books for 5 years. But this is where maybe you have to sweeten the pot, or maybe you get a broker to assist somehow. But this brings me back to this point. If you're an everydayer, you've heard me say this a few times. I'm sure. But if you are a team that feels as though your window for legitimate contention is soon to be opening, and it certainly feels like the Minnesota Wild are building momentum that way, based off of who we expect to be joining the team and filling key roles starting next year. If you feel as though you are a team that is entering into your window, what you need to do is make sure that as much of your prospect pool and draft capital helps get you to that point. Because think about it this way. A 2027 or 2028 first round pick is not going to help you in your current window of contention. Because A, it's a few years down the road to draft, and that player is going to take probably at least 3 years to get there anyway. But if you can use that first round pick to go get something to help you right now, that's worth looking into. And if you have prospects that are taking a while to develop, well, are they helping you right now? Are they helping you achieve your goal right now of legitimate contention? Again, using an example, not saying that the Wild have opened into their legitimate contention window yet, but I'm just using this to illustrate a point. If you have a prospect that's 4 years away, 5 years away from cracking the lineup, your window could possibly be closed by that point. It's a tug of war all the time between we got to allow the prospects to percolate and just continue to accumulate prospect depth and farm system depth. At the same token, it doesn't guarantee success. It doesn't guarantee you to be able to get to where you want to go. Ask Anaheim how that's going. Ask Chicago how that's going. Just because you have high draft picks doesn't mean that your franchise is going to be able to develop them properly to be able to help you win. So I guess to pull this back full circle, I feel like the Minnesota Wild are at a point right now, and especially to solve their scoring woes, they have enough physical play, grit, defense, all those different things. But think about how long we've been clamoring for Liam Ogren, how long we've been waiting for Danila Yurov, how long we've been fantasizing over what Riley Heidt could do for this lineup. You know why we do that? Is because we're getting tired of seeing the same three players carry the team while the other 15, 16, 17, 18 go 10 plus games without a point. Tage Thompson, by extension, let's just see the longest he has gone between goals. Okay, he had a 5-game stretch in which he did not score a goal. But other than that, he had 7 goals in October. He had 4 goals in a 4-game span in November. He has 6 goals so far in December. And his longest drought of the season is 5 games. That also coincided with a 13-game losing streak. But if he doesn't have to be the number one option, you'd think that would almost kind of liberate him a little bit and allow him to truly unleash and become the Tage Thompson that we all hoped he would be that season. He had 47 goals. I don't know. It's not likely to happen, but I'm in a dream big phase as we get closer to, because we're always going to have the blockbuster discussions, the Brock Nelson discussions. They're always going to be there. but I like to think outside the box. And just tell me right now. Tell me that Tage Thompson wouldn't help. Tell me that he would not help Kirill Kaprizov. I'll hang up and listen. Thanks, everybody, for tuning into today's episode. Once again, we will have you covered with a couple more episodes tomorrow as we get you ready for the game against the Dallas Stars. We'll have a postcast after that game as well. And we'll let you know about... I haven't even, to be honest, I haven't even looked at the schedule beyond that. But we'll let you know what we have for postcast coming up next week. We got New Year's Eve and Tuesday and Wednesday. So short work week, but we'll keep you posted on everything. Appreciate everybody's patience as I continue to navigate through this stretch to get a new routine down. We're getting close. Well, I think by the start of the new year, we'll have one down that will lead to more consistent posting. So appreciate everybody's patience, and thank you for tuning into today's episode of Locked On Wild. What would it take to get Tage Thompson? I'll just throw it out there. I think it would take a high pick, a young NHL player, and a top prospect. But it's a price I'm willing to pay because I think he could make that big of a difference. But we'll save that for another day. And make sure that you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any conversations like this as we move throughout the rest of the season. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.